Okay, so anime can pretty much go one of two ways. Alright, so you got the good ending. You know, character arcs wrapped up pretty well. It overall feels really conclusive, or perhaps slightly even open-ended to introduce a second season, unless it's made by Madhouse. But in general, the ending is well-fitting and leaves the viewer pretty satisfied. And then you got Evangelion. One of the most important aspects to any form of fiction entertainment is the conclusion of its primary plotline. The reason being is that as humans we have the tendency to be an absolute monkey brain, who forget what they had for breakfast 3 hours ago and only remember it as being good. And it's no different to conclusions in anime either. Often once beginning a new anime, you tend to remember the initial feeling of its opening sequence. Whether it's that really gripping opening theme or OST, an engaging first few lines of dialogue, or moe. We only really remember anime beginnings if it's really intrigued us, and allowed us to further continue the show. But then, we sort of enter this limbo phase, where during the duration of the mid-plot elements, we're following the anime and its story provided, but hardly remember it upon completion, unless various shocking plot twists occur, or memorable moments. But this is where the conclusions take place. Depending on the anime you're watching, there's actually a variety of conclusions that you often find. For instance, anime original endings are usually better executed, seeing that the studio knows well in advance how and when the story will come to its final hour. Stuff like Psycho Pass or Violet Evergarden, which although have no real connection to an original manga or novel, still provide some pretty noteworthy and satisfactory endings. But what is the key element in determining the success of a conclusion? It's actually more simple than you think. Power. Okay, I promise I'm not on drugs. The power of an ending, or rather the impact you feel from it, not only defines the weight and worth of the show, but is the most important aspect from the show itself. Because if there's anything that will take away from an anime, it's the sheer brilliance seen in its conclusion. So how exactly is this element portrayed then? Well, of course it's dependent on the show. I can't exactly put a moe cutesy dance sequence at the end of a seinen anime, because of course it just wouldn't fit. So here are some reliable criteria to have yourself something one could regard as a pretty solid anime conclusion. First up, the ending needs to make sense, and tie into the plot and its premise. Unless you're watching Evangelion, spawning plot devices and conveniences in order to conclude your series is arguably worse than skipping JoJo parts. And trust me, you don't want to skip JoJo parts. You're literally including things for the sake of vanity, so that the conclusion appears to be better than it actually is. The plot needs to be clear and coherent throughout, and any setup intended to play into the conclusion needs to be embedded well into the storyline and characters long before the climax. Secondly, our characters and their arcs need to make sense. If our conclusion is character-based and relies on their portrayal to conclude our events entirely, then they mustn't differ from their writing, and appear to incorporate traits and attitudes they didn't formerly possess. For instance, I couldn't exactly turn Naruto into a mindless killing machine in the final episode, because that's just not his character, nor his writing. And finally, and arguably the most important factor, is to ensure our viewers are kept satisfied with the conclusivity of our ending. If it is open-ended, then it must transition well into the next season, such that the viewer enjoys it enough to be able to consider watching its upcoming installments, and if the ending is intended to be conclusive, then all loose ends need to be tied up, and any burning questions need to be addressed. Now, a personal favourite example of this is probably going to be the conclusion for Steins Gate. It's brilliant because it had the final episode not ending the plot, but rather concluding the character arcs and tying up any loose ends. And it did this all the while providing such a fun and really comedic way to end our beloved cast of characters. But with that being said, there's one anime ending that truly sticks out from the rest. Now, what's so brilliant about Code Geass is the setup. Our protagonist's goal in mind was to invent a future of peace and tranquility for his younger sister, and this would be accomplished by any means possible, even if it meant allowing power to corrupt him and betraying alliances. But Code Geass knew from the very genesis what it was doing. It tricked its viewers and silently hinted at its painfully bittersweet, yet beautiful conclusion that came out so unexpectedly that only during the final chimes were we able to truly encapsulate the genius behind this writing. And if you've seen this anime, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So, in summary, as long as you're not a brain-dead writer who can't comprehend that storylines need to be cohesive and actually make sense, and set things up correctly without pulling plot points from a magic hat, then you've actually got yourself a half-decent ending. If you've also managed to ensure your characters stick to their writing and personalities, as well as providing something satisfactory for our audience, then you've got yourself a great ending. And well, that's it really. Just make sure you don't pull off an Evangelion and start including the endings that make me want to dig my own grave. No, seriously, after that mess of an ending, I honestly just wanted to punch a hole in my wall.